Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. After Prime Minister Modi and Canadian Prime Minister Carney met on the sidelines of the G7 summit and vowed to reset India-Canada ties, Canada has finally made the big Khalistan admission. In a first, Canada's top intelligence agency officially acknowledged that Khalistani extremists are operating from within its borders. For a very long time, India has maintained that Canada has given a free run to these extremists under the garb of freedom of speech and expression. And this acknowledgement was long overdue. But what will change after this report? That's the big question. Canada continues to accuse India of meddling and overall has really shown no attempts to assuage Indian concerns on Khalistan agenda on its soil. Without action, what purpose will this report serve? And is the political reality in Canada finally capable of putting violent plans against India in their place on its soil? We'll take that and more to our guests joining us in just a bit. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service, first up, confirmed that pro-Khalistan elements operate in Canada. This is what they have said in their yearly report. Khalistan extremists continue to operate in Canada. They use Canada as a base to plot against India, and these plots include Khalistani extremists using Canadian soil for the promotion, fundraising and planning of violence, primarily in India. Now, the word violence here is extremely important because this is no longer about freedom of speech or expression or the right to protest and assemble. This has been always about violent tendencies that the K gang shows very openly in front of cameras, and otherwise the fact that it condones the killing of Indian leaders in the past and even makes threatening statements against present Indian leaders. The Canadian Intel's admission on Khalistani extremism is a long overdue acknowledgement, as I said, but in the same breath, the agency also continued its tirade against India. Canadian Intel named India as one of the perpetrators of foreign interference and espionage in Canada, alongside countries like China, Russia, Iran and Pakistan. The report claimed that the Nijjar case revealed links between Government of India and criminal networks. This despite them giving no real proof of it yet. The report even accused Indian officials and their alleged Canada-based proxy agents of influencing Canadian elections. Now, India has staunchly denied involvement in Nijjar's death and rejected earlier allegations of interference made by Ottawa. But there are several questions that Canada needs to answer, especially with regards to the probe in Nijjar. Delays in indictment, they show a lack of preparedness. Why is there no conclusion as far as their own legal processes are concerned? No substantial evidence that has undermined Canada's position repeatedly. A lot of time has passed. We've not really seen anything new. Shoddy investigations also show that there is an element of pandering to K elements in Canada. Remember, Nijjar is on camera, on videos, getting arms training. Those videos went viral after his assassination, but they seem to be ignored by Canadian agencies. Why do they act like they don't know what Nijjar was up to? There have been threats to the Indian state that have been issued by him and other proxies as well, also ignored by Canada. Are these not legitimate questions to ask? So we ask this question today. After this admission, what will change? When is the action going to come? That with our guests coming up. Let's go across to our guest joining us, Professor Brahmachaleni, Strategic Affairs Expert, Yashwardhan Kumar Sinha, former diplomat with us, Ramneek Singh Mann, activist, will also be joining us. Mr. Sinha, I want to begin with you and ask you exactly what you make of this admission. Why has it come now, you think?
Thank you for having me on your show, Shivani. I think this admission is only an acceptance of what everybody knew in India, in Canada, and elsewhere. This has been going on for decades. As I said in one of the other shows, you can recall the Kanishk bombing, the Atlantic in 1985. That ghastly incident, people responsible, some of them still roam around scot-free. So Canada has been a hub for Khalistani terrorists for many, many years, indeed decades. So this admission, better late than never. I do hope that under a new government in Canada, under a new Prime Minister, Michael Carney, I think relations will improve. And I do hope that they will crack down on these elements, because ultimately the threat is to Canada itself. Tomorrow, I'm not saying it will happen, but tomorrow there may be a call for instance, Khalistan in British Columbia, when they realize that they can't get a Khalistan in India. So I think they need, for their own interest, for their own security interest, to crack down on these terrorist elements.
Brahmachaleni is also with us. Brahmachaleni, do you feel that this is some sort of a mending of ways? What has changed in the Canadian thinking to finally accept that there is this menace and that there is a propensity shown towards violence that they plan on Canadian soil versus India? That certainly then cannot be used, cannot be justified under the garb of freedom of speech, protest, and etc.
You're right, absolutely, Shivani. Earlier this week, Carney and Modi signaled a diplomatic thaw. They agreed to send new high commissioners. So that was an important step. This report by CSIS, as it's known, CSIS, Canada's main intelligence agency, was obviously written much before the Carney-Modi meeting. Probably was written months earlier and released now. This is the 2024 annual report. And while it acknowledges that a small group of Khalistanis are extremists and promoting violence primarily in India, it actually has larger paragraphs slamming India for its interference in Canada's affairs, for using proxy agents in Canada, and for drawing a direct link between the Indian government and the Niger murder.
Yes.
Those sections are appalling because they show that CSIS still, is ready to hold India accountable for actions that are still under investigation by its own admission in the report. It says that the murder of Niger is still under investigation.
Exactly.
And yet in its report, it jumps to the conclusion, it accuses India of being directly involved in the murder of Niger, which goes to show that the mindset in CSIS has not changed.
In fact, I'm glad you pointed that out. Brahmachaleni, I don't know if you heard, but in my opening, as I established this story, I talked exactly about that there are no conclusions of their own processes as far as Niger's killing is concerned. So how is anybody supposed to believe the conclusions that they've come to? And the fact that their intelligence agency says one thing while their law processes haven't been able to establish that shows that this is coming from somewhere else.
Yes, and I think the root cause of the India-Canada tensions is the fact that successive governments in Canada since the early 1980s have given political space to Khalistan terrorists. The result was the twin Air India bombings of 1985. Fortunately for Canada, India did not exert sustained pressure on Ottawa. After those twin bombings of 1985, Canada took 21 years to institute a commission of inquiry into those twin bombings. The problem in India is that we suddenly wake up and we speak about an issue, and then after a while we allow that issue to fade away from public discourse.
But do you think this signals some sort of a change at all, or no? Because the same report, as you're saying, goes on to also accuse India and make accusations that are not justified by proof just yet.
No, Shivani, the diplomatic thaw has occurred largely because Carney is seeking access to the Indian market. The Canadian economy is stagnating. Canada's relations with the two big giants, China and India, are strained. And Carney has reached out both to China and to India to reset diplomatic ties, largely because his agenda is economic.
Okay.
And he realizes that the only way you can revive the Canadian economy is by improving relations with India and China. The question is about India. What is India securing by returning high commissioners? Has India secured an assurance from Carney that Indian diplomats will be able to function in Canada
without any fear and threats? Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely. I'll come to that question. Why shouldn't India use that economic might then that Canada is so that is so important to Canadian interests now to get what it also wants? I'll come to that question, and Mr. Sinha can also come in on this. But Ramneek Mann, Indian activist who's obviously focused a lot on the Khalistani movement, is also joining us. Ramneek Mann, what do you make of this admission by Canada? Will anything change? Can we expect any action? Do you think time has come for India to assert itself more?
Hi, Shivani. Good evening. And, the Canadians have been running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. So they have to take a side. They have to finally decide whether they will permit these Khalistani extremists to operate from their soil, to emit, terrorism and the thought of separatism in India from their soil, or they're going to put a stop to it. As a matter of fact, this is the first admission coming from Canada that the Canadians have actually, the Khalistanis have actually been a problem for Canada. The kind of people that they've been accepting, we have a MLAT, that's a mutual legal agreement treaty. So they've not been honoring the MLAT, and as the gentleman before me was referring to, you see, Shivani, in the 1970s late, when Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, was the Prime Minister, India had extended a request for extradition of Sarvinder Parmar. That didn't happen, and eventually 329 people in the Kanishka lost their lives, and 2 Japanese handlers lost their life in Japan. So there were a total of 331 lives lost for a count of 1 extradition. And now there are 50 plus extradition requests which are pending with the Canadians. So they have to now really come up, and they have to show their seriousness when it comes to dealing with the Khalistanis. As a matter of fact, there have been human trafficking, drug trafficking, gun menace, all of this. You will find traces of Khalistanis involved in this. So this first dossier that you see is where they accept the Khalistanis, but they still are trying to say that the agents of Government of India were involved. So, it's the policy of running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. That cannot work. So Canadians have to take a stance once and for all, and finally, they have to realize that India is a very important partner for them.
Exactly.
And these internal problems, because these Khalistanis are primarily Canadian citizens, and they're trying to destabilize India, or they want to balkanize India, break India. That should not be allowed.
Yeah, actually, the whole thing about Canada, sticking to this whole Nijjar thing is, oh, he's a Canadian citizen, oh, he's a Canadian citizen. Weren't you aware of what he was up to, Mr. Sinha? I mean, this is a central question that I keep asking. I mean, Canadians can't be, up in umbrage because of what happened to Nijjar, but completely turn a blind eye to what these Canadian citizens are up to. And if they're accepting that this is violent in nature, there is no excuse for it. But I want to take forward that point as well of accusing India of some sort of espionage and all. These are serious charges. Don't you think the Indian External Affairs Ministry, the bureaucrat community, the Foreign Affairs community should also take it up more strongly? You can't just make these accusations and get away with it.
I think this matter has been taken up at the highest levels in the past by successive prime ministers. I remember Dr. Manmohan Singh taking it up. As far as Nijjar is concerned, for instance, read the New York Times of today. Their reporter here, whether the reporter based here or the editor in New York, refers to Nijjar as a prominent Canadian Sikh cleric. That is a joke. It is bizarre that they call him a prominent cleric. He is a terrorist. He was a terrorist.
This is the New York Times. They love clerics.
This is the New York Times. I'm quoting directly from the New York Times.
They love all clerics, especially ones who have terrorist backgrounds.
Canadian Sikh cleric. I mean, that's how they describe it. So this is par for the course as far as they are concerned. This admission, I hope, will lead to, if not a change of heart, at least some cooperation between the two countries in such matters. Mr. Maan mentioned the MLAT. He mentioned Talvinder Singh Parmar. I remember October 1992. That's when I joined as Deputy Secretary Pakistan in the Ministry of External Affairs. One of the first things that I sort of confronted or was faced with was the killing of Talvinder Singh Parmar. I think it was in Jalandhar, if I'm not mistaken. But I think what has happened is that the Canadian government, over the like father, like son, Mr. Pierre Trudeau, Mr. Justin Trudeau, they've all given sanctuary. They rely on that vote. They rely on that vote bank in British Columbia and elsewhere. And I said, I mean, as I said, this should be of security concern to Canada more than India, because they are not going to get a Khalistan in India. So where will they get it? In British Columbia? I mean, that's something that they need to ponder over.
But, Brahma Chaleni has been mentioning this, and I want to take your view before I go back to him. What is India doing about it? That's the central question. We can't just look at Canada alone. They may have their own reasons. They may have their own problems and compulsions. But don't you think this is a great opportunity for India to now tell Canada, you want to do business with us, you have to listen to our concerns?
Of course, I think it's very important. We don't even have a High Commissioner, because the previous High Commissioner, whom I know personally, an outstanding officer, was declared a person of interest. It's absolutely absurd that the High Commissioner, the representative of the President of the Republic of India, could be involved in anything as bizarre as trying to eliminate Mr. Nijjar or anybody else. So I think Canada needs to do a lot of soul searching. We are going to press when we have our High Commissioner in place, and I'm sure even through other channels, our so-called, if there is a security cooperation, then at the level of NSA and at various levels, we would be continually in sort of stressing this point that unless Canada takes action against Khalistani terrorists, relations between the two countries are not going anywhere. And the big market that India is beckoning. I was High Commissioner in London, so I know exactly how India's economic transformation has changed hearts in various chancelleries in the world, and I hope Canada is one of them.
Brahma Chaleni, you're convinced that India can use this sufficiently, and maybe time has come for Canada to realize that it has more other pressing issues than wanting to use this K gang as some sort of a pressure tactic against India?
India is now the fourth largest economy. It will soon be the third largest economy. Look at the irony. The G7 summit, the G7 is supposed to be a organization of the world's leading economies.
Yes.
India is only a special invitee, not a regular member of the G7. It goes to show how irrelevant the G7 is becoming, because the G7's share of the global GDP has been dwindling. India needs to be a regular member of the G7. In fact, the G7 needs to be expanded. But the real point about Canada is this, that partly it's domestic politics, because Khalistani extremists have captured the Gurdwaras. These are cash-rich individuals. They are very well organized. They fund political activity. They fund important politicians in both parties. The second more important reason is what the Indian High Commissioner, Sanjay Verma, said on Canadian television before he left Ottawa after being expelled. He said Khalistani extremists and terrorists are, quote unquote, deep assets of CSIS, the Canada's main intelligence agency. Now, if they are deep assets of Canada's intelligence service, obviously, we cannot expect Canada to clean up its act, just the way Pakistan refuses to clean up its act. If the Canadian intelligence is nurturing these elements, in fact, according to Canadian press reports, Nijjar, before he was assassinated, in the months before his assassination or his killing, I should say, because there's no evidence that it was a political killing. In the months before his killing, according to the Vancouver Sun, CSIS officers
Yes.
regularly met with Niger.
Yes.
Now you can understand intelligence officers meeting with Niger once, twice, thrice about security matters. But every week, according to the Vancouver Sun, in other words, they were treating Niger as an intelligence asset.
So what's the
That's
way
the
forward?
relationship.
What's the way forward? What should India do given these realities? It can't really cut off Canada completely either. That's not a solution, cutting off ties with a country.
No, Canada and India are two leading democracies. They need to have a cooperative relationship, and traditionally they've had a friendly relationship. But India has to leverage its economic strength, the fact that the Indians in Canada are one of the largest communities in Canada. The Sikhs in Canada constitute the world's largest Sikh diaspora. All that hands India significant leverage because these are Canadian citizens now. They need to come to India, whether they are Sikhs or Hindus. All that provides India leverage. India has to use
that leverage. You know, India is always very reluctant to do this, Ramneek Maan. This question has been raised several times, particularly since this standoff with Canada, that why don't we do more? You know, a lot of these people who are in Canada, who are known members of the Khalistani gang, they work against Indian interests. You know, there is more action that the Indian government can take, even with them sitting overseas against their assets. There are other interests, human interests that they may have in India. You know, we've got to start reacting as a tough state.
No, that we are. We have been asserting ourselves, and that's why you see the kind of reaction that has been coming from. You know, diplomatic relations are primarily based on reciprocity, mutual reciprocity. And that's where the dip came in, I believe. But then again, you know, it was India showing its strength, diplomatically speaking, that we had to put our foot down. But as a matter of fact, you see, I believe what Chalani Saab said is absolutely correct, that the CSIS and these, Five Eyes countries are using K-goons and the other elements to try and keep India under check, somehow or the other exert pressure on India. And all of this, you know, emanating from their land. He's also right when he says that CSIS officials were in touch, because this has come out from nobody else but Niger's own son. As a matter of fact, Niger entered Canada as Ravi Sharma, and that's how, you know, he actually got his citizenship from after the intervention of CSIS. So this is a very deep-rooted conspiracy against these.
Ramneek, my question is, can't India do more against the known operatives of the Khalistani gang in Canada? Can't we do more? Not diplomatically, I'm saying as individuals.
India had adopted a carrot and stick approach, because if you remember that there was a blacklist of people who were barred from entering India, and that blacklist was slowly, you know, faded away and finished eventually. That was a welcome step that the government of India took to actually, you know, try and bridge the, the gaps. But that didn't work. The Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Modi, has done so much for Sikhs, you can't even imagine. But then again, you see the images coming from Canada, which are heartbreaking.
So appeasement doesn't work, no. That's precisely the point. There's no point appeasing these individuals. They've made up their mind. Besides, it's not our responsibility.
The money trail is not broken unless, you know, these people are stopped funding or stopped protecting from the Canadian system or the US system. Because these Five Eye countries have been the ones behind, the brains behind this Khalistani agitation. As a matter of fact, my sources tell me that this visit by the Prime Minister in G7 has actually shaken up the Khalistanis there. They have not been paid for the agitation that they had put out this time. So there are cracks that we see, but India has to go strength. It has to show its strength.
Well, it is also about Canada to make up its mind, what it really wants to focus on, because both of these cannot go on as usual. There can be no business as usual.
Yeah, that's what I said. You can't be running with the hare and hunting with the hound. You have to take a side finally.
Speaking of that.